Chapter 8. Snoscumbers. But if you don't eat people like all the others, Sophie said, then what do you live on? That is a squelchingly tricky problem around here, the BFG answered. In this slosh-funking giant country, happy eats like pineapples and pigwinkles is simply not growing. Nothing is growing except for one extremely icky poo vegetable. It's called the snoscumber. The snoscumber, cried Sophie. There's no such thing. The BFG looked at Sophie and smiled, showing about 20 of his square white teeth. Yesterday, he said, we was not believing in giants, was we? Today, we is not believing in snoscumbers. Just because we happen to not have actually seen with our own two little winkles, we think it is not existing. What about, for instance, the great squizzly Scotch hopper? I beg your pardon, Sophie said, and the humble crib. What's that? Sophie said, and the rapscale. The what? And the Frobscottle. Are they animals? Sophie said. They is common animals, said the BFG contemptuously. I is not a very noble giant myself, but it seems to me you is an absolutely know-nothing human being. Your brain is full of rotten wool. You mean cotton wool, Sophie said. What I mean and what I say is two different things, the BFG announced rather grandly. I will now show you a snoscumber. The BFG flung open a massive cupboard and took out the weirdest looking thing Sophie had ever seen. It was about half as long again as an ordinary man, but was much thicker. It was as thick around its curve as a preambulator. It was black with white stripes along its length and was covered all over with coarse knobbles. Here is the repulsant snoscumber, cried the BFG, waving it about. I squoggle it, I despise it, I desponge it, but because I is refusing to gobble up human beings like the other giant, I must spend my life guzzling up icky poo snoscumbers instead. If I don't, I will be nothing but skin and groans. You mean skin and bones, Sophie said. I know it is bones, the BFG said, but please understand I cannot be helping it if I sometimes say things a little squiggly. I is trying my very best all the time. The BFG suddenly looked so forlorn that Sophie got quite upset. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't mean to be rude. There was never any school to teach me talking in giant country, the BFG said sadly. But couldn't your mother have taught you? Sophie asked. My mother, cried the BFG. Giants don't have mothers. Surely you is knowing that. I did not know that, Sophie said. Whoever heard of a woman giant? Shouted the BFG, waving the snoscumber around his head like a lasso. There was never a giant woman, and never will be one. Giants is always men. Suddenly Sophie felt herself getting a little mothered. In that case, Sophie said, how were you born? Giants isn't born, the BFG answered. Giants appears, and that's all there is to it. They simply appears, the same way as the sun and the stars. And when did you appear? Sophie asked. Now how on earth could I be knowing a thing like that? Said the BFG. It was a long time ago. I couldn't count. You mean you don't even know how old you are? No giant is knowing that, the BFG said. All I is knowing about myself is that I is very old, very, very old and crumbly, perhaps as old as the earth. What happens when a giant dies? Sophie asked. Giants is never dying, the hard into his mouth and bit off a huge chunk of it. He started crunching it up, and the noise he made was like crunching off lumps of ice. "It is filthy," he spluttered, speaking with his mouth full and spraying large pieces of snoscumber like bullets in Sophie's direction. Sophie hopped around on the tabletop, ducking out of the way. "It's disgusterous," the BFG gargled. "It's sickable. It's notsome. It's maggot-wise. Try it yourself. This 1,000 balsam snoscumber." "No, thank you," Sophie said, backing away. "It's all you're going to be guzzling around here from now on, so you might as well get used to it," said the BFG. "Go on, you snipsy little winkle. Have a go." Sophie took a little nibble. She spluttered. "Oh no, oh gosh, oh help." She spat it out quickly. "It tastes of frogskins," she gasped. "Rotten fish." "Worse than that," cried the BFG, roaring with laughter. "To me, it tastes of cockroaches and slime wanglers. Do we really have to eat it?" Sophie said. "You do, unless you was wanting to become so thin you'll be disappearing into a thick ear." "Into thin air," Sophie said. "A thick ear is something quite different." Once again, the same winsome look came into the BFG's eyes. "Words," he said, "is oh such a twitch-tickling problem to me all my life. So you must simply try to be patient and stop squibbling. As I am telling you before, I know exactly what words I am wanting to say, but somehow or other they are always getting squiddled around." "That happens to everyone," Sophie said. "Not like it happens to me," the BFG said. "I is speaking the most terrible Wiglish." "I think you speak beautifully," Sophie said. "You do," cried the BFG, suddenly brightening. "You really do." "Simply beautifully," Sophie repeated. "Well, that is the nicest present anybody has ever given to me in my whole life," cried the BFG. "Are you sure you was not twiddling my leg?" "Of course not," Sophie said. "I just love the way you talk." "How wonder-crump," cried the BFG, still beaming. "How whoopsie-splunkers. How absolutely squiffling. I is all of a stutter." "Listen," Sophie said. "We don't have to eat snoscumbers. In the fields around our village there are all sorts of lovely vegetables like cauliflowers and carrots. Why don't you get some of those next time you go visiting?" The BFG raised his great head proudly in the air. "I is a very honourable giant," he said. "I would rather be chewing up the rotsome snoscumbers than snitching from other people." "You stole me," Sophie said. "I did not steal you very much," said the BFG, smiling gently. "After all, you was only a tiny little girl." Chapter 9. The Blood Bottler. Suddenly, a tremendous thumping noise came from the outside of the cave entrance, and a voice like thunder shouted, "Runt! Is you there, Runt? I is hearing you jabbling. Who is you jabbling to, Runt?" "Look out," cried the BFG. "It's the Blood Bottler." Before he had finished speaking, the stone was rolled aside, and a 50-foot giant, more than twice as tall and wide as the BFG, came striding into the cave. He was naked except for a dirty little piece of cloth around his bottom. Sophie was on the tabletop. The enormous, partly eaten snoscumber was lying near her. She ducked behind it. The creature came clumping into the cave and stood towering over the BFG. "Who was you jabbling to in here just now?" he boomed. "I was jabbling to myself," the BFG answered. "Piffle whizzle fizz," shouted the bottler. "Pug's wallop," he boomed. "You was talking to a human being. That's who I is thinking." "No, no," cried the BFG. "Yus, yus." search your primroses. He grabbed the BFG by the arm. And you is going to help me do it. Us together is going to winkle out this tasteful little human being, he shouted. The BFG had intended to whisk Sophie off the table as soon as he got the chance and hide her behind his back, but now there was no hope of doing this. Sophie peered around the chewed-off end of the enormous snoscumber, watching the two giants as they moved away around the cave. The blood bottler was a gruesome sight. His skin was reddish-brown, and there was black hair sprouting on his chest, arms, and on his stomach. The hair on his head was long, dark, and tangled. His foul face was round and squashy-looking. The eyes were tiny, black holes. The nose was small and flat, but his mouth was huge. It spread right across the face, almost ear to ear, and it had lips that were like two gigantic purple frankfurters, lying one on top of the other. Craggy yellow eyes stuck out between the purple frankfurter lips, and rivers of spit ran down his chin. It was not in the least difficult to believe that this ghastly brute ate men, women, and children every night. The blood bottler, still holding the BFG by the arm, was examining the rows and rows of bottles. You and your pibbling bottles, he shouted. What is you putting in them? Nothing that would interest you, the BFG answered. You is only interested in guzzling human beings. And you is dotty as a dog smuggler, cried the blood bottler. Soon the blood bottler would be coming back, Sophie thought to herself, and he was bound to search the tabletop. But she couldn't possibly jump off the table. It was 12 feet high. She'd break a leg. The snoscumber, although it was as thick as a perambulator, was not going to hide her if the blood bottler picked it up. She examined the chewed-off end. It had large seeds in the middle, each one as big as a melon. They were embedded in soft, slimy sludge. Taking care to stay out of sight, Sophie reached forward and scooped half a dozen seeds out of the way. This left a hole in the middle of the snoscumber large enough for her to crouch in so long as she rolled up to a ball. She crawled into it. It was wet and slimy, but what did that matter? It was going to save her from being eaten. The blood bottler and the BFG were coming back towards the table now. The BFG was nearly fainting with fear. At any moment, he was telling himself, Sophie would be discovered and eaten. Suddenly, the blood bottler grabbed the half-eaten snoscumber. The BFG stared at the bare table. Sophie, where is you? He thought desperately. You cannot possibly be jumping off that high table. So where is you hiding, Sophie? So this is the filthy, rotten garbage you is eating, boomed the blood bottler, holding up the partly eaten snoscumber. You must be cockles to be guzzling such rub squash. For a moment, the blood bottler seemed to have forgotten about his search for Sophie. The BFG decided to lead him further off the track. This is the scrumdiddly-umptious snoscumber, he said. I was guzzling it gleefully every day and night. You should never try a snoscumber, blood bottler. Human beings is juicier, the blood bottler said. You is talking rummy tot, the BFG said, growing braver by the second. He was thinking that if he could only get the blood bottler to take one bite of the repulsive vegetable, the sheer foulness of its flavour would send it bellowing out of the cave. I is happy to let you sample it, the BFG went on, but please, would you see how truly scrumptious it is? Do not be guzzling the whole thing. Leave me a snitch it for my supper. The blood bottler stared suspiciously with small piggy eyes at the snoscumber. Sophie, crouching down inside the chewed-off end, began to tremble all over. You is not switch fiddling me, is you? Said the blood bottler. Never, cried the BFG passionately. Take a bite, and I am positive you'll be shouting out, scrumptious this one defect is. The BFG could see the greedy bottler's mouth begin to water more than ever at the prospect of extra food. Vegetables is very good for you, he went on. It's not healthful always to be eating such meaty things. Just this once, the blood bottler said, I is going to taste this rotten eats of yours. But I is warning you that it is tillsome. I is smashing it over your sludgy little head. He picked up the snoscumber. He began raising it on its long journey to his mouth, some 50 feet in the air. So if you wanted to scream, don't, but that would have been an even more certain death. Crouching among the slimy seeds, she began to feel herself being lifted up and up and up. Suddenly there was a crunch as the blood bottler bit a huge chunk off the end. Sophie saw his yellow teeth clamping together a few inches from her head. Then there was utter darkness. She was in his mouth. She caught a whiff of his evil-smelling breath. It stank of bad meat. She waited for the teeth to go crunch once more. She prayed that she would be killed quickly. Roared the blood bottler. And then he spat. All of the great lumps of snoscumber that were in his mouth, as well as Sophie herself, went shooting out across the cave. If Sophie had struck the stony wall of the cave, she would most certainly have been killed. Instead, she hit the soft folds of the BFG's black cloak, hanging against the wall. She dropped to the ground, half stunned, and then she crawled under the hem of the cloak, and there she crouched. You little swine bugler, roared the blood bottler. You little pig swiller. He rushed at the BFG, smashing what was left of the snoscumber over his head. Fragments of the filthy vegetable splashed all over the cave. You is not loving it, the BFG asked innocently, rubbing his head. Loving it, yelled the blood bottler. That is the most disgusting taste that is ever clutching my teeth. You must be buggles to be swallowing sludge like that. Every night you can be galloping off happy as a hamburger and gobbling little juicy human beings. Eating human beings is wrong and evil, the BFG said. It is guzzling and voluptuous, shouted the blood bottler, and tonight I is galloping off to Chile to swallow a few human chili beans. Is you wishing to know why I is choosing Chile? I is not wishing to know anything, the BFG said, very dignified. I is choosing Chile, the blood bottler went on, because I is fed up with the taste of Eskimos. It is important I has plenty of cold eats in this scaldingly hot weather, and the next coldest thing to an Eskimo is a chili bean. Human beans from Chile is very chilly. Horrible, the BFG said. You ought to be ashamed. Other giant is saying that he's wanting to gallop off to England tonight to guzzle school chidlers, the blood bottler said. I is very fond indeed of English school chidlers. They has a nice inky booky flavour. Perhaps I will change my mind and go to England with them. You is disgusting, the BFG said, and you is insult to the giant peoples, shouted the blood bottler. You is not fit to be a giant. You is a squinky little squiddler. You is a pippling little pitsqueak. You is a cream puff nut. With that, the horrible blood-bottling giant strode out of the cave. The BFG ran to the cave entrance and quickly rolled the stone back into place. Sophie, he whispered. Sophie, where is you, Sophie? Sophie emerged from under the hem of the black cloak. I'm here, she said. The BFG picked her up and held her tenderly in the palm of his hands. Oh, I is so happy to be finding you all in one lump, he said. I was in his mouth, Sophie said. You was what? Cried the BFG. Sophie told him what had happened, and there I was telling to eat the filthsome snoscumber, and you You was all the time inside it, the BFG cried. Not much fun, Sophie said. Just look at you, you poor little chiddler, cried the BFG. You is all covered in snoscumber and giant spit. He set about cleaning her up as best he could. I is hating those other giants more than ever now, he said. You know what I should like? What? Sophie said. I should like to find a way of disappearing them, every single one. I'd be glad to help you, Sophie said. Let me see if I can't think up a way of doing it. Chapter 9. Frobscottle and whizpoppers. By now, Sophie was beginning to feel not only extremely hungry, but very thirsty as well. She had been at home. She would have finished her breakfast long ago. Are you sure there's nothing to eat around here, except those disgusting, smelly snoscumbers? She asked. Not even a fizzwingle, answered the big friendly giant. In that case, may I please have some water? She asked. Water, said the BFG, frowning mightily. What is water? We drink it, Sophie said. What do you drink? Frobscottle, announced the BFG. All giants is drinking a Frobscottle. Is it as nasty as your snoscumbers? Sophie asked. Nasty, cried the BFG. Never is it nasty. Frobscottle is sweet and jumbly. He got from his chair and went to a second huge cupboard. He opened it and took out a glass bottle that must have been 6 feet tall. The liquid inside was pale green and the bottle was half full. Here is Frobscottle, he cried, holding the bottle up proud and high, as though it contained some rare wine. Delicious, fizzy Frobscottle, he shouted. He gave it a shake, and the green stuff began to fizz like mad. But look, it's fizzing the wrong way, Sophie cried, and indeed it was. The bubbles, instead of travelling upwards and bursting on the surface, were shooting downwards and bursting at the bottom. A pale green, frothy fizz was forming at the bottom of the bottle. What on earth is you meaning the wrong way? Asked the BFG. In our fizzy drinks, Sophie said, the bubbles always go up and burst at the top. Upwards is the wrong way, cried the BFG. You mustn't ever be having the bubbles going upwards. That is the most flush, bunky rubbish I was ever hearing. Why do you say that? Sophie asked. You is asking me why? Cried the BFG, waving the enormous bottle around as though he were conducting an orchestra. You is actually meaning to tell me you cannot see why it is a scrotty mistake to have the bubbles flying up instead of down. You said it was flush monkey. Now you say it's scrotty. What is that? Sophie asked politely. Both, cried the BFG. It is a flush monkey and scrotty mistake to let the bubbles go upwards. If you can't see why, you must be as quacky as a duck hound. By Ringo, your head must be so full of frog squeakers and buzz wrangles. I is fritted if I know how you can drink it at all. Why shouldn't the bubbles go upwards? Sophie asked. I will explain, said the BFG, but first tell me, what name is you calling your Scotland's bottle? Frobscottle by. One is Coke, Sophie said. Another is Pepsi. There are lots of them. And the bubbles all going up. They all go up, Sophie said. Catastrophe, cried the BFG. Upgoing bubbles is a catastrophe. Will you please tell me why? Sophie said. If you will listen carefully, I will try to explain, said the BFG. But your brain is so full of buck whiffles, I doubt you will ever understand. straight down into your tummy. Is that right? Or is it left? It's right, Sophie said. And the bubbles is also going into your tummy. Right or left? Right again, Sophie said. And the bubbles is facing upwards. Of course, Sophie said. Which means, said the BFG, they will all come whiffling up into your throat, out of your mouth, and make a foul, some belchy burp. That is often true, Sophie said, but what's wrong with a little burp now and again? It's sort of fun. Burping is filthsome, said the BFG. Us giants is never doing it. But with your drink, Sophie said. What was it called again? Frobscottle, said the BFG. With Frobscottle, Sophie said, the bubbles in your tummy will be going downwards, and that is a far nastier result. Why nasty? Asked the BFG frowning. Because, Sophie said, blushing a little, if they go down instead of up, they'll be coming out somewhere else with an even louder and ruder noise. Whizpopper, cried the BFG, beaming at her. Us giants is making whizpoppers all the time. Whizpoppers is a sign of happiness. It is music to our ears. You surely is not telling me a little whizpopper is forbidden amongst human beings. It is considered extremely rude, Sophie said. But you is whiz-popping, is you not, now and again? Asked the BFG. Everyone is whiz-popping, if that's what you call it, Sophie said. Kings and queens are whiz-popping, presidents are whiz-popping, glamorous film stars are whiz-popping, little babies are whiz-popping. But where I come from, it's not polite to talk about it. Redunculous, said the BFG. If everyone is making whiz-poppers, then why not talk about it? We is now having a squiggle of this little delicious Frobscottle, and you will see the happy result. The BFG shook the bottle vigorously. The pale green stuff fizzed and bubbled. He removed the cork and took a tremendous gurgling squig. It is glummy, he said. I love it. For a few moments, the BFG stood quite still, and a look of absolute ecstasy began to spread over his wiggly face. And suddenly the heavens opened, and he let fly with a series of the loudest and rudest sounds Sophie had ever heard in her life. They reverberated around the walls of the cave like thunder. The glass jars around the walls of the cave rattled on their shelves, but most astonishing of all, the force of the explosions actually lifted the enormous giant off his feet like a rocket. Whoopee! He cried when he came back down to earth. Now that is what whiz-popping is all about. Sophie burst out laughing. She couldn't help it. Have some yourself, cried the BFG, tipping the neck of the normal bottle towards her. Do you have a cup? Sophie asked. No cups, only bottle. Sophie opened her mouth and very gently the BFG tipped the bottle forward and poured some of the fabulous Frobscottle down her throat. And oh gosh, how delicious it was. It was sweet and refreshing. It tasted of vanilla and cream, with just the faintest trace of raspberries on the edge of the flavour. The bubbles were wonderful. Sophie could actually feel them bouncing and bursting all around her tummy. It was an amazing sensation. It felt as though hundreds of tiny people were dancing a jig inside of her and tickling her with their toes. It was lovely. It's lovely, she cried. Just wait, said the BFG, flapping his ears. Sophie could feel the bubbles travelling lower and lower down her tummy, and then suddenly, inevitably, the explosion came. The trumpet sounded, and she too made the walls of the cavern ring with the sound of music and thunder. Bravo, shouted the BFG, waving the bottle. You was very good for it.